All right, so Gid, many of the people that listen to the show will be familiar with you because you would have been the face in the opening page of the Kaluma magazine a couple of years ago. It was a letter from up high, from the boss, and many of us would have become familiar with you through our early experiences of that brand. And you've kind of come full circle in a way. But catch us up for those of us who haven't had the privilege of knowing you personally over the last couple of years. Catch us up on what you've been doing since you left that business.
So I was actually, as a child, Mike, I grew up around aeroplanes. My father was in the aeroplane business his whole life, and so it was a very kind of normal thing. And I always kind of had in my head this idea that I was going to somehow be involved with aeroplanes. I learned to fly when I was in my early 20s, and that was quite fun. But was really interested in the business side of flying. So I had some, fantastic early experiences, Kalula being one of them. It actually started a little bit before that, well, obviously as a kid, but when I was studying overseas, there was one guy who I had huge admiration for as a leader, and his name was Herb Kelleher.
Mm-hmm.
And he ran and started Southwest Airlines, which was not only an incredible airline and today one of the most successful in the world, but just an incredible organization and culture and way of doing things, and really kind of revolutionized, I think, a lot of culture thinking and leadership thinking. And I ended up meeting him when I was studying in Chicago, and I met Herb Kelleher, and that was a very, very formative experience. And then to come back and get involved in the industry was great. I learned that it's actually a very hard industry, and not all glamour, and lots of big challenges. I suppose like any business and any real endeavor. But that was the start of the journey, and that chapter ended about 10 years ago, as you said.
Tell me about that meeting with Herb. What were there moments or things that he said or pearls of wisdom that he shared with you that kind of stuck with you through your professional journey?
Yeah, I mean, he really was an incredible guy. Anyone who's interested in culture and leadership, he wrote a book called Nuts, and he was a bit of a crazy guy, but he had that incredible balance of being like, very left field, but also very extremely sharp. And I remember when he came to our university, and he walked around the room, and we had like a little welcoming function for him, and he remembered everybody's name. Like, I've got a strange name, and he remembered my name, and I thought, gee, this guy, is just, a very special guy. And then he was giving his presentation to the business school, and he insisted on having a bottle of bourbon, which we all thought he was maybe going to pour himself a bourbon and drink it before or after the talk, but he was having none of that. He actually had the bottle while he was talking, and every time he took a break, he took a swig of bourbon. and that was this incredible character that, so I mean, he had some very interesting stories. The one was he had some legal dispute with one of his competitors in America, and the dispute was going on and on and on, and eventually he said, okay, and he went out. He was very good at PR as well, and he said, this thing is going to be settled by virtue of an arm wrestle. And he got the CEO of the company he was fighting with, and they sat down, and the press obviously lapped it up, and they had this arm wrestle. And I think he lost the arm wrestle and had to pay the case. But it was just, one of those very kind of unusual approaches that he had. So so that was very interesting and quite formative for me, I suppose, in terms of where I ended up going.
And I mean, that kind of thinking was a big part of your approach, certainly initially, and it has been a constant in your entrepreneurial journey, is taking experiences from a customer perspective that are kind of commoditized, very predictable. And I mean, almost every airline, when you jump on the airline and get the security speech, you get the same spiel. If you fly enough or have the privilege of flying enough, you can almost rattle it off word by word, because you've experienced it so many times. And you know, I got the sense certainly your impact on the industry up front was to go, let's look at all the things that people experience as being kind of normal and make them interesting, introduce a new perspective on it, add a level of humor or self-awareness or whatever it might be. Is that very much part of your leadership style and part of the way you approach culture?
I think so. It's just, you know, I've always been curious, and I've always been a little bit irritating to a lot of people in the sense that I want to know why things are the way they are and why they are done the way they are. And sometimes there's good reasons. Often there's very good reasons why there's a certain way of doing things. But, you know, maybe on the margin, in the 10% or 20% of times, there's no good reason, and they're just done the way they are because that's the way they've always been done.
Sure.
And so I think identifying those opportunities maybe around the edges is firstly a lot of fun, because it really does fire up those creative juices in our brains. It gives people a lot of energy. You know, I think people are naturally creative. Their creativity has just been suppressed by, you know, years and years of being told to do things in a certain way. So I really do love that environment where people around me are just, you know, questioning things, coming up with ideas. A lot of them don't work, won't work. That's fine. So we'll move on to the next idea. And that is a, you know, beautiful part of, you know, the kind of environments that I'm lucky enough to work in with, at the moment, pretty small teams, but definitely people that are open to that, and, you know, don't have big egos, so that if, you know, if the idea is shot down, it's fine. And then there's another idea. Just a small example of that, Mike, which is a recent one, is we've been having to come up with a name for our new airline, and we were struggling, and even our agency, you know, came up with some names which I don't think were suitable. And then we were busy, like in the office, talking about, what about this name, what about that name? And then I was thinking, but why don't we ask everybody, like everybody in the country, what they think about a name? And we just sent out a few press releases, and it got a lot of attention because it was like quite a cool thing. Like I've heard about families that were driving on, you know, trips with the rest of the family, and half the trip they were debating what the name should be, and then they went on our website, and in the end we got 25,000 suggested names. So it was just like just a small example of, you know, how it was a different approach. Not the first time in the world. There have been other cases, you know, where that's happened, but it was just a different way of solving a problem that we had.
That was definitely going to be on my list of things to ask about.
Oh, sorry, man.
No, not at all. I'll definitely get back to that one. But you make such a great point around there are industries where, for whatever reason, sometimes it's related to security or customer well-being, or just like we said earlier on, the commoditization of a particular service, where a lot of assumptions are made about the way we should do something or the way it should be approached. And as you said, sometimes when you ask the question, why is it that way? The only suitable answer that somebody can come up with is because it's the way we've always done it. It's, you know, that's why change a winning formula sort of mentality. And the interesting thing about those margins or the edges, as you really put them in an eloquent way, is even the slightest improvement on that experience, or the tiniest change, can have a massive benefit in terms of surprise element or novelty element, or even measurable value to the client. It's just interesting that so few organizations that are incumbents, that aren't startups, that aren't challenger brands, think of it in that way. I mean, I was flying recently to Cape Town, and I flew SAFE, and I had to laugh because in the disembarkment announcement, the flight attendant says, you know, just want to thank you so much for choosing SAFE because you had the choice of so many airlines. And I was like, I really didn't. It was you guys or you guys. That was my choice. But obviously, because it's what they always say, it's what they always say. I'm not going to change it. But I mean, to that point, this is a really strange time for, I mean, the travel industry in general, but especially for airlines. We've watched really well-established, long-serving businesses decimated by the unpredictability of the COVID crisis. And I guess there might have been some people who heard about what you were doing and what you were creating that said, well, that seems a decision against the flow of traffic. Gidon is swimming upstream. Tell us a little bit about what, as much as you can, about what led to this choice. Why start an airline now, in this moment?
Sure. I will answer that question, but I just wanted to ask you one. Have you ever used the word disembark in your normal daily life, or have you ever heard anybody use that word?
I don't think
disembark.
Yeah.
I mean, where does that come from? Like, we were actually joking about the other day that we are never ever going to use the word disembark, because it's not a word. It's not a word that normal people use. You're leaving the plane, you're getting off, you're not disembarking. So we're gonna try and take disembark out of our language. But so listen, it's been just what a time in the world, and very, very, very difficult time for so many, and myself included. Just to share a little bit, and I will answer your question, but just to share like a sense of trauma that I felt, and many have, over the last 7 months, in terms of what's happened in the world, and this feeling that it's difficult, it's challenging. There's so many people struggling and suffering, and that's a very difficult. I found that a very difficult place to be. And my antidote always with those feelings, I've had them before, where one kind of it's a borderline helplessness, like things are really bad, and what does the future hold? And I've always dealt with those situations with a sense of what can be done, what could we be doing, where's the opportunity, where's the light? And there always is a light. That is the consistent thing. There always is a light. The books that were written during the Holocaust with people that had a sense of hope, that there was some light, whatever hope, and that hope actually helped them survive. That tiny sense of hope that a few people had. So that's been part of the way that I've seen things, and in this particular context, yes, airlines have all around the world have imploded and disappeared and cut back, and people weren't flying for a long time, and are starting to fly again, and there was, I think, a real opportunity to start something, not only because there were so many that had fallen by the wayside, but because suddenly it was inexpensive to get aircraft and inexpensive to get maintenance facilities, and a lot of things started looking really, really attractive. So so that's the context, and and what we're starting to see, I think, with, let's hope, the heading towards the end of COVID in some way, is that so many things in the world are going to continue. And one of those things which gives me great hope and great enthusiasm and happiness is that human connection will continue. And we have learned through this journey of doing what we're doing now, being on Zoom, that this does not replace human contact and human interaction. And in fact, our very happiness is dependent on human connection, which has a consequence in terms of people needing to travel and see their friends and their families and their business partners and all of that. So that's a bit of context.
Yeah, I think certainly, I mean, the point of having access to resources that might not have been available at the same price point makes obvious sense, and I'm sure that there will be some sort of leveling out in the playing field, and over the next years, because I imagine it's going to take some time for us to get over the trauma, practically and kind of emotionally of the last couple of months. But when you think about, I guess one of the things that you do have at this point in time is the luxury of thinking differently about the product and about people's experiences of it. And how and I mean, you've alluded to this slightly, but I want maybe to dig a little deeper into how the last 9 months have made you think differently about the customer experience of travel, and how that might translate to a different experience for me. As a, when I book my first ticket with you guys, what will the experience be like?
Yeah, so I think many businesses build their service, their products around a system that is bound by many rules and regulations. I mean, the airline industry is very regulated. There's safety issues, and now with COVID, there's safety protocols, and before you know it, there's just tons and tons of layers of rules and compliance and things that have to be in place. And again, many of them with good reason, but the customer gets forgotten, because the customer is actually just really, this person that's going to come through that, that has to abide by all these rules. And if they don't abide by the rules, there's some consequence or penalty or reprimand or something.
Yeah.
And I think that's a shame, because obviously the customer is the source of any business. But the customer has functional needs which need to be filled. They need to get on the plane. They need to be safe. They need to get to where they're going safely. But then they have emotional needs. They are most times, have a level of anxiety. So if you take flying is anxiety provoking. Many people are afraid of flying. They're afraid of being late. They're afraid that they may want to change their flight and may not be able to. They're afraid that their luggage may be too heavy. So there's just these layers of anxiety, and where we're coming at it from is, let's really be aware of those, mindful of those, and let's see where we can address those. Okay. Because we're dealing with people, we're dealing with humans, and as you say, even if, and it's such a brilliant point, even if you do it around the margin, even if what we do is 80% the same as what the other guys do, but 20% different, but that 20% is meaningful and insightful and thoughtful, I think we can make a real difference, not only in terms of our business and we can get more customers, or maybe they'll pay us a little more than other guys. But I just think, like, it's not, it really isn't just about making money and looking, that's, you got to do that, others the business won't exist. But to have a mission or a desire to genuinely make people better off, make them happier, and particularly in this environment where people are traumatized and sad and anxious, it is very rewarding, to be able to be introducing something and to be working on something that brings light and upliftment to people. So that's a real motivator. And the conversations we have internally are, a lot of it is about that. Yes, how can we be more efficient? How can we? But it's really trying to make people feel better and help them through their lives in a small way.
So I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a second, if that's okay.
Please, of course.
I think this is a fascinating topic, and it's a topic that I don't think is limited to your industry. I mean, we could be having the same conversation if we were talking about financial services or people's declining trust in centralized institutions and banks or whatever it might be. Oh, hell, I'm kicking the desk. I'm excited about this. So the question I want to ask is, yes, flying is an anxiety-inducing activity. I have two members of my family that don't enjoy flying. It's something that we have to think about preparing for in advance to ensure that they have a better experience. But it's not because any of them have been involved in a tragic it's just something that has kind of, as you said, sometimes a level of irrational fear associated with it. My question is, sure, your job is to alleviate, absorb, create the conditions for people to have a better experience of traveling, but how much onus is also on the customer to play ball, right? And what I mean by that is, one of my constant, and I'm being very, very selfish here, but I'm just going to come right out. One of my constant frustrations at the airport is standing in a queue of people where they clearly have overloaded their luggage and are just hoping to get by, or they haven't read the instructions and have brought a golf bag with, hoping that they can escape without having to pay for the extra luggage, or getting on the plane and whining about what's not available or what is available, or sitting in the wrong damn seat. and slowing things down, or being late and then begging to get onto the plane or whatever. There is a responsibility in this relationship between me and the airline because of those regulatory limitations to do my part as a customer. And I'm willing to bet that there's a bunch of people like me who would pay a premium to be a part of a community of travelers who aren't going to mess with a system like that, because I know that it has a ongoing impact on the efficacy of the delivery of your product. In the same way that in an insurance environment, I'm paying for the lowest common denominator, right? I very often am subsidizing the worst customer. Is there a part of it that you think about that's on, and I mean, it's probably not politically correct to say that, but the customer also has a responsibility. They need to up their game in terms of participating in the quality of because it is, as you said, it's a highly competitive and commoditized environment. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, listen. I think one does have to be clear. There are parameters, and those parameters need to be clearly communicated. But it's quite a shame if the whole system, in any system, not just an airline process, but if any system is designed around that rogue 1%, 5%, whatever that small number is, it's just such a shame for the 95% of people that are honest, that are responsible, that are reasonable, to build a whole system around the 5% that you're trying to, prevent from doing selfish things or irresponsible things is a shame. And one has to have processes for the 5%, but I think the challenge is to build a process for the 5% that doesn't impact the 95%. So in your example, and one of the things we're working on is there are going to be situations at the airport with baggage where people come and they've got too many bags or they're too heavy or whatever. How are we going to deal with it? And how we're not going to deal with it is we're not going to hold you up, and we're not going to have a whole long queue dealing with it. We will take that person aside. We'll deal with it. We will sort it out, but not at the expense of creating a whole process, which currently is the case where, that person's got to go and they've got to go somewhere else and pay more and come back. And so I think those are the kind of things that need to be created with the 95% in forefront in our minds. How are we going to create an experience for them, but at the same time, just obviously make sure that people are reasonable. I love the idea. We were busy debating it of a fair usage policy. Now, what is a fair usage policy? Fair usage is just saying to the customer, we're going to be reasonable as long as you're reasonable. Like, for example, with internet, which is internet usage. Some companies offer a fair usage. You can use as much as you like, but be fair. You can't have your Netflix streaming 24 hours a day. That's not fair. That's not fair to everybody else. So I think that building of trust is important. There is so little of it, and in the absence of trust, what does one have? Lots and lots and lots and lots of rules. And it's easy. Rules are easy. Anybody can make rules. I think that's very easy to just say, well, here's all the rules. Here's the rule book. To all your staff, make sure you just abide by the rule book. If anybody breaks the rules, you'll be fired. And that's an easy way of doing things. But I think a lot is being left on the table, and a lot of opportunities being lost with that approach.
So I have, and I've written about this before, but I have an unhealthy amount of my ego wrapped around that stupid number that is my Uber rating. That I'm deeply self-conscious about the fact that I don't have a higher Uber rating, and I lie awake at night obsessing over what I might have said to a driver to upset him hopefully what actually happened was he just pressed 1 star instead of 5 stars. But it's possible that I really upset somebody. And I mean, we've seen the emergence of services where a lot of responsibility is mirrored back on the client, because there is this kind of rating methodology in place, and there's a fair amount of thinking that goes into how to cater the service towards customers that have performed in a positive or a constructive way. Are you influenced by these new platforms at all when you think about designing services? I mean, might it get to the point where flight attendants are rating my behavior as to whether or not I switch my phone on or off? What are Yeah, have you thought at all about that, or in what other ways are you maybe influenced by the Ubers and the Airbnbs of the world?
Yeah, so one of the most exciting things about the airline project is that the guy driving it is Jonathan Ayash, and he came out of Uber, Southern Africa. He was there at the start 7 years ago, and really has was instrumental with one or two other people in building up Uber. And just the way that he thinks, the way he approaches things is so refreshing and crisp in terms of the customer journey, and they, you know, they've created an unbelievable customer journey with lots and lots of hard work and many iterations and constant innovation. So that kind of thinking is really, really helpful. And yeah, and we're trying to, obviously within practical bounds, we're trying to implement as much of that thinking as possible.
So, so you mentioned the naming experiment earlier on, which, as you said, has been done before to greater or lesser degrees of effectiveness, and it is only because of my prevailing love and respect for you that I didn't submit Plainy McPlainface as a suggestion for the airline.
Other people did, by the way.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the safest bet that ever there was. that airline face might have come through as a suggestion. But has anything surprised you about that experience? Because it's quite a bold thing to do. And do you imagine you might include the customer in other parts of your innovation journey in future?
I think so. It's definitely got us thinking about exactly that. It was an impulsive thing to do. We had no idea what the response would be. It's really interesting to get into the heads of people, and you know, almost like, I mean, just with this exercise, there were many, you know, different names, but like some real trends in terms of like how people think about just naming. Naming is actually very difficult. It's not an easy thing to come up with a name. It caused me stress for at least 2 or 3 months, just thinking about this name and then falling in love with it, and then telling my mother, and she tells me it's a terrible name, and then I, you know, start doubting it, and then I get onto a new name and try and get comfortable with it. So it's quite a process, and yeah, it's just interesting how people think, interesting how they, you know, how they, you know, certain trends, like one of the names that, I won't tell you the real name because we're gonna release it in a couple of days. But like Ubuntu was like a huge, I think 200 or 300 people that love the word Ubuntu. It's interesting how people's think in a similar way. But it's also interesting how I think sometimes creativity is limited, and people think in a like what we were saying, they think they go down a certain direction, and it's a few people that actually break out and think about it in a very different, creative way.
Well, I know I'm one of many people that's excited to see the big reveal, and of course also to book the first tickets, man. I'm looking forward to being a valued customer of the and hopefully if there is a rating, keeping my rating high. But you know, this is not the only thing that you are busy with and the only thing that you care about. I know that during lockdown, you spoke early on about seeing and taking action to enable light and hope. Can you talk to me about some of the other projects you're involved in? And I know there are people that'll be listening to this and watching this that are going, wow, like, where does this positivity and this initiative come from? Because a lot of people, I think, are feeling quite deflated at the moment. Talk to us a little bit of what else you're involved in, and maybe people listening to this can get involved too.
So lockdown was again a crazy experience for all of us. We had started an organization called SA Harvest about 6 months before lockdown, obviously with no knowledge of what was coming. And the organization is a food rescue organization. So basically, in a nutshell, there's massive volumes of excess food. About a third of all food goes to waste around the world, and in South Africa as well. And there's somewhere around 10 to 15 million people that are undernourished in our country, which is a massive number. So the thing with food is that there's plenty of it around, and we're actually a very food rich country, but through various reasons we can't get into them now. But good nutritious food doesn't get into the hands of people that need it, and certainly doesn't get into their hands at an affordable price. So SA Harvest sources this food that would have gone to waste, or certainly some of it, from retailers, from farmers, from restaurants, and gets it to beneficiary organizations who prepare meals for their recipients. So we were chugging along slowly. Pre-lockdown, we had some restaurants on board. We had one single truck in Cape Town that was parked outside my house, and it was a bit frustrating because we thought we had like really important work to do, and we were doing it on a very small scale. But lockdown changed all of that, because suddenly the problem was massive. And we were actually able to source a lot of food that was in the system that wasn't able to get to where it needed to go, and we were able to access very significant volumes of good food. And so the organization really got a massive boost from a funding point of view. People all of a sudden were very aware about hunger. It's such a strange thing, or crazy thing. Like, hunger's not a new thing. Hunger's been an issue in this country for a very, very long time, but now it was forefront in many people's minds. So we were able to raise some good funding, and really just get the organization into a very good space of building capability and infrastructure and technology, hiring some amazing people from industry actually, and doing our thing. So it's going well, and it's a proper organization, and it's got a lot of work. It's got a massive obligation in terms of what it needs to do in the future. But yeah, that's the short kind of summary. But it was completely circumstantial. If not for lockdown, I suspect we would be kind of chugging along and trying to get people to care about hunger. And fortunately, it sounds strange to say that, but fortunately, I think people actually care a lot more than they did 7 months ago.
Yeah. Well, we'll include the links to SA Harvest in the show notes, so that people can take a look and visit the website and contribute if they're interested, or find other ways to get involved. But yeah, I just want to, from a personal perspective, but I think on behalf of many South Africans, just thank you for your positivity, for your proactivity, for constantly moving forwards. It's it's such a pleasure knowing you personally and being able to tap into some of that inspiration on a regular basis. And I'm super excited to see what's going to happen next. And yeah, I have no doubt it's going to contribute enormous value as it always does.
Thank you, man. Thanks, Mark. And just to say, and I don't know if you've still got time, but just, we talked about people's innate creativity. The other thing which I think humans are starting to learn is we all have innate goodness. The goodness is just masked by all stuff that forms over time. So I think like part of the job is just to peel away the stuff and get people back to their goodness, whether it's serving a charity or a non-profit, or being in a business and just trying to do something good for your customers, which will be good for business, and it will be good for the bottom line. But it's I think the role that we have is just to enable people and encourage people, and allow them to let that goodness emerge, because it is there.
Sure. Don't know if I could have said that better myself. Thank you so much, Gid. I wish you the very best this weekend. And yeah, looking forward to seeing those announcements and big news items breaking.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Look after yourself, friend.